Zach Cregger, folks. After giving us Barbarian a few years back, delivering on a story that consistently played with my expectations and constantly defied genre stereotypes, Cregger is quickly becoming one of the top people on my list to follow, and I was very eager to see what he had next up his sleeve. So it's safe to say I ran to the theater to check out Weapons. The plot follows a seemingly inexplicable case of 17 children from the same classroom who mysteriously vanish on the same night at exactly the same time, leaving only one child behind. I hate to give in to hyperbole, but I feel pretty confident in saying this is my favorite movie of the year so far, and while there's still plenty of time left, it's really hard to believe anything will hold a candle to it for me. Weapons is a masterful display of horror and mystery, and just like Barbarian, it establishes convention only to continuously subvert it by reinventing itself, leaving you to question every next step. It sets it up as if it's going to be straightforward, like you can easily predict every move before it happens. It makes you think you've seen it before, but then quickly shows you that you have absolutely no idea. Even when playing into tropes of the genre, Cregger finds a way to make them impactful, never settling for cheap thrills for the sake of shock factor alone. Everything is with a purpose here and meticulously executed. There's one moment in the film that rocked me to my core to the point that I was frozen in my seat, tears rolling down my face uncontrollably. It's just got a way of getting under your skin, constantly leaving you with a feeling of discomfort. There's no shortage of terror, and it even contains a fair share of gore that, while minimally placed, is very intense and downright brutal when it happens. It's ambitious and takes bold swings and almost entirely lands everything it's going for, and it feels like it's indebted to the staples of the horror genre while simultaneously being wholly original. It wears its admiration for the hits on its sleeve, but it always finds new ways to convey its message in a way that feels fresh and authentic. Also, the framing, the shot composition, the aesthetics. There's a constant haze and lingering darkness over the whole thing that keeps you in a constant state of heightened tension, even when the coast seems to be clear. It's like a monster movie, a haunted house movie, and a psychological thriller all in one. I think Cregger proved with Barbarian that he had a knack for executing true terror and suspense that gradually builds in an unpredictable way. But with Weapons, he just takes it up a notch. Part of that is just due to an extended budget that gives him more access to take creative liberties, but also I think it has to do with him feeling a bit more confident in his abilities as a filmmaker. But just like with its horror, it also plays the mystery very smart, which that in its own right is very impressive. It's hard to craft a story that caters to both genres without falling short in the execution of one or the other, but Cregger proves he's just as capable of writing multi-layered stories as he is pulling strings behind the camera. He showed promise with that in Barbarian, but here it just feels like he's more dialed in. The idea of parents and a teacher losing their kids is disturbing in its own right, but the way it explores those themes works very well in its favor. It chooses to sit with these characters as their anxiety builds, forcing you to feel their pain, the desperation, the deep sense of helplessness, the regret of what they could have done differently. The way it shows that sometimes the easiest way to cope is to place blame on the one who seems the most culpable, even with no evidence to stand on, just to make sense of it all. But it constantly continues to unravel and evolve into something more unexplainable and harder to reckon with. The film plays its structure like Prisoners by way of what I could only relate to a Tarantino picture, giving us the same story told in multiple sequences from the perspectives of each character involved, jumping back and forth in time. The way it operates, you constantly think you've begun to piece things together, only to discover new insight that makes it all the more perplexing. It works in favor of the story, as even once it reveals the truth, there are still more layers to peel back. It never feels boring or repetitive because we're experiencing it in new ways. And sure, I can see where people might become frustrated with it, wanting to spend more time with a certain character only to have the rug pulled out from under them. But it didn't bother me, and by the end of it, it still felt like a rewarding experience. It tells a story through the way of quick exposition as bookends, multiple chapters, and a few dream sequences in which I love the way it uses those moments to elevate the narrative a bit, getting into the mind of these characters, showing us more surreal interpretations of the way these characters are processing things. It never comes off as cheap or gimmicky because the heightened effects and thrills of the dream state never bleed into reality. It's also important to note that this cast once looked very different until strikes happened. which forced Cregger to kind of start from ground zero. But I think it played in the film's favor by the end of the day, because not to say the original cast wasn't good, but with actors among the likes of Pedro Pascal, I think at this current moment in time, it would have given the film a more larger-than-life feeling. But with who we ultimately got, it's able to come off a bit more grounded. Julia Garner is a powerhouse. She possesses this ability to come off as this innocent presence who wouldn't possibly hurt a fly, but also happens to give off this subtle sense that maybe, just maybe, something is off about her, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And Josh Brolin exudes so much passion and force. Ironically, I think his character is given the most interesting material, and yet I wish he would have been able to have more time to explore said material. Benedict Wong and Aldin Ehrenreich are both great additions, and surprisingly, Austin Abrams was a big standout for me. Seriously funny, and his segment goes in some of the most unpredictable directions in all of the best ways. Speaking of funny, this movie is hilarious, man. Which may sound weird considering I pegged the film as a horror mystery, but it's not the type of humor that undermines the tension, or that's even as heavy-handed and intended for big laughs like Barbarian was. It's funny in an uncomfortable way, and it mainly just stems from characters reacting to situations where they, just like the audience, are struggling to process the absurdity of the moment. It's done in a way that shows that horror can be quote-unquote elevated and still have fun simultaneously without sacrificing emotional or narrative impact. And I also want to give a shout out to Amy Madigan. I watched very little promotional footage for the movie outside of the first trailer, so her character was a complete surprise for me. And I love everything she's doing. Just really good stuff here, man. And I don't think I'm going to say much more than that. I think the film has a lot that can be read into and dissected, whether it's made with a specific idea in mind or not. And it's definitely one I haven't stopped thinking about and trying to wrap my head around since my first watch. And I think it's a movie that will become more rewarding with every subsequent viewing. What's also interesting is that with every chapter and character explored, you learn quickly that these characters aren't without flaws. There are certain characters you're rooting for to have a revelation or a moment of clarity, but it doesn't shy away from showing their imperfections. In fact, at times, they do things that make them very hard to support. They're driven by this state of hysteria from a place of feeling like they're being failed. These children are being failed by the system that seems to have no urgency to find answers, and that causes them to want to take things into their own hands. And to me, that's a lot more believable and easy to understand than if our protagonists were simply without any internal battles or baggage of their own. And there's symbolism of alcoholism and generational trauma and guilt, which just gives the whole thing more depth that I really appreciated. It's really a movie that just does the most with every scene, and the score is magnificent, almost Spielbergian in a sense. It's filled with compositions that enhance the wonder and mystery, but as things become more grim, it incorporates plenty of piercing elements and layered synths that go into the territory of something like Hereditary. It just feels like a movie, and for Zach Cregger being so fresh into filmmaking, he makes a lot of calculated and confident decisions that make it seem like he's been doing this for years. It's not perfect, although I don't have very many issues with it at all, but I will say once answers are given, it throws into question the logic and continuity of things that came before. I'm not sure everything that happens in the movie necessarily needs to happen for it to work, but validity aside, those things still, at the very least, were entertaining and held my attention and didn't hinder the overall viewing experience by any means. I really loved this movie. It managed to succeed at all the things I hoped it would while somehow still doing things to surprise me. And it's very rare that a new horror film sits with me for such an extended period of time after watching, but I just haven't stopped thinking about it. It's the perfect follow-up to a breakout directorial effort, and it shows genuine understanding and appreciation for the genre. This has been an interesting year for movies, but by the end of it, I have no doubt that this will be the one that I'll still be thinking about. So make sure to go support this movie, and if you've seen it, let me know what you think. But until next time, don't shoot your eye out. Peace.